Dare to enter Crow's Quill's books, where tales of forgotten realms and fearless souls come alive. Today's journey, Raven's Prophecy. The Elder Trials, chapters 23 to 26, by Mark and James Lindsay. Will you uncover the truth hidden in the shadows? Chapter 23. Barely a word was spoken between the Neophytes after their narrow escape from the arena, Queen Sable insisting that her guests rest for the night. Astrid was asleep as soon as her head hit the pillow, and it felt like she had just closed her eyes when there was a loud banging at her door. Okay, Astrid called back, staggering to her door. She was surprised to be greeted by the blinding sun, and Lord Asolf, as usual his face was an emotionless mask. Astrid Mace, I wanted to escort you out personally, Lord Asolf said. Astrid didn't know what to say, so instead she faked her best smile and nodded, allowing herself to be led away. You know, Miss Mace, I was rather impressed with how you handled the situation last night, Lord Asolf admitted. Thank you, she replied. They were walking through the elvish marketplace, and the young girl was getting some unusual looks from the locals. Despite your heroism, it doesn't change the fact that Erik has gathered enough points to win the trials. Have you given much thought to your future? Lord Asolf asked cryptically. Astrid shook her head, not sure where this conversation was headed. Yako, leave that poor girl alone, Lord Forsberg said with a chuckle. He walked towards them and placed a paternal hand around the young girl's shoulder. If you don't mind, Lael, we were in the middle of something, Lord Asolf replied irritably. Well, it will have to wait for now, Lord Forsberg said, and indicated the arrival of Queen Sable, and like the other lords, her eyes were fixed solely on Astrid. Ah, the young girl that almost single-handedly saved my kingdom, the Queen said with sincerely, then much to everyone's surprise bowed deeply. I can't thank you enough. If there is anything I can do for you, please name it, the Queen said. Astrid thought hard, realizing that everyone around her had stopped, and was waiting to hear her reply. She knew the Queen wouldn't accept a no. She was starting to panic when an idea hit her. Then she smiled. I don't want anything, but rather I have a proposal, Astrid replied. Queen Sable seemed surprised and intrigued. Go on. After everything that happened last night, with the destruction of the arena and minor damage to the city, I feel bad for what happened, and I was thinking that. Astrid looked around at the Thorn Trinity and attempted to make herself appear as innocent as she could muster. Maybe we could give you the Hittite we've been bartering with, as a token of our gratitude, with your people dedicated to repairs. It wouldn't be fair to make you dig for useless ore, Astrid said with a giant smile. The three lords that made up the Thorn Trinity went from red to purple at the words from the blacksmith's daughter. They knew they couldn't argue, lest they expose their own greed. Queen Sable stared back stunned. I don't know what to say. I think it's a lovely gesture. Too lovely, after all. We are a proud race, and we don't accept undue charity, Queen Sable said. This isn't charity, just the Greytree people doing what's right. Besides, you did say I could have anything, Astrid said innocently. Queen Sable's eyes began to glisten with tears. Well, in that case, if it suits your lords, then I would honor your request. The Thorn Trinity were stricken at the idea of losing out on all that unmined gold and silver, but under the circumstances, didn't have much choice. Lord Raga cleared his throat, his face ashen. We would be delighted to help, in any way we can. We will supply you with the precious herbs you require, and we ask for nothing in return. 1 year, he emphasized. I cannot thank you enough. The generosity of the Greytree people knows no bounds, Queen Sable replied. They spent the next hour trading pleasantries and exchanging gifts before departing, the elves showering them in exotic flowers. The scene as they left was one Astrid would remember forever. The mood changed as they returned to their wagons. As soon they were away from the Queen, the three lords were less than shy in displaying their true feelings. Enoch moved up alongside Astrid and nudged her gently with his elbow. That was a very brave thing you did last night, and an even braver thing this morning. Not to mention stupid, Enoch said. Astrid spun towards him surprised. I don't understand, she replied. What you did was draw a very large target on your back. You made some powerful enemies today. I hope your shoulders are broad enough to bear the brunt of your actions, he said sadly. Then, with the skills of an experienced pickpocket, he slipped a small, wrapped bundle into her pocket. Enough so that she was aware, but no one else. The Queen's advisor wanted you to have this. Don't let anyone else see you with it, Enoch advised, before walking away. He never spoke to her again for the rest of the trip. Chapter 24. Don't tell anyone. Astrid had been sleeping most of the way back. She lifted her face and turned towards Magnus. What? She replied. What happened last night? Don't tell anyone, Magnus repeated. Astrid was weary and confused, and her expression showed it. I know about the fire. I saw it. For your sake, don't tell anyone about it. The Thorn Trinity are not your friend, Magnus said. Not you too, Astrid sighed. Then, seeing the look of confusion, she leant in close. Enoch, she whispered, and Magnus nodded with understanding. They reached Greytree later that afternoon, the trials and trip back having taken a toll on everyone. The wagon creaked its way through the center of town, which was abnormally silent. What's going on out there? Mist asked, her ear pressed against the interior wall of the wagon. They all sat quietly, listening intently to the clop of the horses' hooves, but nothing else. The wagon came to a jerking halt, the horse's breath hot and hard. The driver climbed noisily down from the top of the wagon. They waited anxiously for the door to open, and when it did, they were completely unprepared for what awaited them. Roaring applause, the 6 remaining competitors were stunned when they stepped off the wagon, and were greeted by the entire town. They had been waiting for the arrival of this year's Elder Trials finalists, and the rumors were rife that this year had been the toughest ever. The 7 previously eliminated competitors were also there. They ran forward and congratulated the emerging 6. Despite their fatigue, Astrid and the others were all smiling, overcome by the knowledge that it was nearly all over. Nearly. The Thorn Trinity took their positions on the dais, along with Valen, the All-Seeing. It took several minutes for the crowd to quiet so that Lord Forsberg could address them. I would like to thank the amazing turnout for our Elder Trial participants. All the rumors are true, that this has been the most arduous trials yet to date. And in saying that, the families of those that competed should be very proud of the way in which they have all behaved. No matter how they placed overall, Lord Forsberg announced. That's right, these 13 children will make great citizens of Greytree. This year's winner of the trials will be announced at this evening's Elder Trial celebrations. That is, of course, after the placement ceremony at Druid's Glade, Lord Ragge added, casting a glance towards Valen. All participants are asked. No requested to keep quiet about the placement, even from family members. The numbers still need to be recorded. No one really knows until we make the final announcement, Lord Asulf said, staring hard at Astrid. The crowd cheered once more. All 13 competitors were sent away to rest and clean themselves up, the placement ceremony taking place at dusk. Astrid was glad to be home once more. Druid tended her many wounds, while Ulrich sat and held her hand, a big, proud smile on his bearded face. Can you not look at me like that? Astrid said, self-consciously. I can't help it, we're both very proud of you, Ulrich said. I know we're not supposed to talk about it, but I know for a fact that I didn't win. Erik did, Astrid confessed. We don't care about that. But there is gossip through the village that something went wrong during the last trial, and you saved everyone, including the Elf Queen. Ulrich beamed. Astrid thought back to the previous night, and she shivered, both from the nightmares that she witnessed, and the knowledge that she herself had caused the commotion. A problem she was still coming to terms with. It was nothing. Really, Astrid whispered. Nothing. I hardly doubt that, Ulrich said. Husband, leave her alone. Can't you see that she's tired and uncomfortable with all the fuss? Druid admonished. Ulrich looked at his daughter, paying attention to the dark marks under her eyes, and some of the nasty bruises and cuts that now decorated her body. He frowned. "Of course, I'm sorry. I should have been more aware." Ulrich shrugged and climbed to his feet, then gently kissing the top of his daughter's head. "It's okay, Father. I'm just tired," Astrid replied, touching his arm. He smiled back. "You are going to love the surprise I have in store for you," Ulrich said and departed, a slight spring in his step. Turid shook her head with a smile. "You'll have to forgive him. He's very excited about it," Turid said. "I hope he hasn't gone to too much trouble," Astrid said. "Ah, you know your father. He doesn't do things in halves," Turid replied. Chapter 25. The 13 competitors were taken by Volin, the all-seeing, to Greytree's most sacred place, the Druid's glade, discovered by Briccius, the unyielding, a sorcerer with powerful insight and abilities, and along with Drust Thorn, the great-grandson of Caddoc, the original founding father of Greytree. They had formulated ceremony that every teenager on their 13th birthday must take, the very same as the one in with Astrid and the others were about to take. Everyone was dressed in their finest clothes, tunics, and dresses, made with impeccable care for just this occasion. Volin led then, single file, through a dark edge of the forest and down a twisting path made of stone that eventually came out in a small, secluded area that was literally cut off from the rest of the forest. A beautiful pond that fed water through an underground spring, water so pure it was said to be the tears of the goddess Isolde, goddess of love, a deity of such beauty, that it was said that any man that was to behold her form completely would be turned to ice. Ever vain, Isolde wept at the thought that despite her great beauty, no man would ever witness it and live. The area around the pond was breathtaking. Exotic flowers of brilliant colors, ferns of such lush abundance, made the legend of the waters, magic, seem more than plausible. Volin made the 13 teenagers line themselves out, shoulder to shoulder. "Ebre noceles sanun," Volin chanted in a deep voice. He repeated the words several times, then regarded the teenagers before him. "We are gathered here before the gods, as your fathers and fathers before them once did. We do this to honor our ancestors, as well as to find our futures. I will pass each one of you, and in turn you will take a sacred stone. Then I will call you forward and ask you to toss the stone into the Druid's glade. From there, I will decipher the image that the gods have decreed upon you. That image will determine your future," Volin said solemnly. The teenagers tried not to look around, but it was obvious that they were all petrified by what lay ahead. Volin held out a black velvet sack, and one at a time he passed the 13 teenagers and directed them to remove a stone from within. Volin then took his place directly beside the water. "Mjol Osborne!" Volin called out. Mjol looked about. It was obvious that she was anxious, especially at being called first. Volin beckoned her forward. Mjol sighed and stepped forward beside the sorcerer. "Toss the stone, and behold your future," Volin said ominously. Mjol nodded, closed her eyes, and bit her lower lip. It was obvious to all she was praying. Her eyes flew open, and she tossed the rock into the pond. It landed with a loud plop, and the ripples created a dark image that only the sorcerer and the young girl could see. Volin studied it a moment before he declared its designation. "Seamstress," he announced. Mjol let out a breath of relief and took her place back amongst the others. Slowly and methodically, he called them all forward. Den Badger, builder. Iver Dalgard, baker. Rangvald Ackerman, farmer. Bjorg Leifson, shield maiden. Bjorg smiled, her head held proudly aloft. Emma Borg, apothecary. Torben Knudsen, boat builder. Erik Azulf, soldier. Erik looked impassively. Katla Hagen, cook. Magnus Brand, apothecary. Pace Raga, soldier. Pace looked around his eyes, angry and hurt. his fists clenched hard at his side, desperately wanting to yell something. Anything. In the end, he said nothing, only moved back to his spot. "Mist Osborne, seamstress." The Osborne girl turned to her sister and smiled warmly, then nearly danced back. "Astrid Mace," Volin said aloud. The blacksmith's daughter stepped forward, beside the sorcerer, and held out her stone. It was white and without flaw, smooth and cool to the touch. Astrid took a breath and tossed the stone into the dark waters, watching the ripples, and waited for her fate to be decided. They stared hard. Images were formed, hard to make out. A half-moon, a tree, a dragon, then finally a bird. Astrid's imagination went wild at the possibilities. Even Volin appeared mystified, despite his enigmatic exterior. Finally, he answered. "Blacksmith," Volin said in an even tone. Astrid felt her heart in her throat. Did she hear right? Did the gods answer her prayers? This was fantastic. She felt like jumping for joy. Instead, she nodded and took her place back with the others. Volin said some words to the group, words meant to encourage and instill a sense of worth amongst them. However, Astrid heard none of it. All she could think of was the look on her father's face when she got to finally tell him the wonderful news. The round of applause from the others shook her from her thoughts. Smiling brightly, she joined in with the clapping, after which they were led away. Chapter 26. Within the hour, they were led back to the center of the village, where everyone was waiting. Tables laden with festive foods were also present, as well as wines and mead, indicating a long, pleasant evening. The 13 competitors were shown to the head table, alongside the Thorn Trinity and Volin. The town as a whole greeted them with mirthful cheering and loud applause. They took their seats and waited for Lord Forsberg to start the proceedings with a long and pompous speech. Instead, it was short and sweet, obvious to all that he was eager to eat and drink. Much has already been said, so I don't wish to harbor on with arduous twaddle, other than to say that we are all very proud of those men and women before us. But before we begin, I ask each competitor to stand up and announce to their long-suffering families. There was a titter of nervous laughter that accompanied this statement. "Pace Raga, would you be so kind as to begin?" Pace nodded, staring hard at his father, Lord Raga. "Soldier," he said bitterly. Lord Rag appeared surprised, but held his tongue, instead clapped in response. They all followed. From the families there were tears and laughter, surprise and nods of pride, especially from Ulrich Potts, who stood up and wiped a tear from his eye. When the teenagers had finished, Volin stood up, and everyone fell silent, many a family interested in what he would say next. As you are all fully aware, for one lucky participant, they will get to choose their own destiny. As you know, the trials this year were the toughest on record, but through it all, one stood out from the rest. So, without further ado, the winner of this year's Elder Trials is Erik Asolf, Volin announced. The village cheered enthusiastically as Erik stood up, although he looked far removed from someone who had just won their life's dream come true. "Erik, please tell us, will you remain a soldier, or do you have another dream in which you choose to follow?" Volin added. Erik nodded. "As you are all aware, I have trained my entire life, ready to follow in my father's footsteps, so I suppose it's no shock that the gods would decree that being a soldier is my destiny. However, I have no designs on that life. Instead, I have decided that I want to be a game warden under Gunny Coppinger," Erik said with a devil-may-care smile. The crowd fell silent. They all knew that what the Lord's son had requested was a role beneath his birthright. No one dared clap. Instead, they turned to Lord Asolf and waited with bated breath on what he would do next. The commander of the Grey Watch stood up, his face stern and grim, and as he was about to speak, a flaming arrow struck the table to his right and changed things forever. "Skollreavers!" someone screamed. Everyone turned to the water's edge. and in the distance 6 dragon boats broke through the low fog, their gruesome prows carved into the fearsome visages of demons and monsters. Lord Asulf's voice broke the panic. "To arms! To arms!" he roared. Dozens of flaming arrows descended onto the celebrations. Many of the guests dived for cover under the tables. Some were not so lucky, dying under the heavy assault of the oncoming raiding party barrage. Lord Asulf was armed, and with a party of ready soldiers headed towards the water shields, and swords at the ready. Ulrich grabbed Astrid by the arm. "Go! Take your mother to safety!" he ordered, his brow heavy and jaw firm. "But I can." Astrid began, but was silenced by his no-nonsense glare. "This is no time to argue, girl. Do as I say," Ulrich repeated, leaving his daughter no misinterpretation to his meaning. "Yes, father," Astrid said. She grabbed her mother by the arm and started to leave, casting one final look at her father, who had thrown off his wolfskin cloak, revealing a leather-armored vest underneath. Ulrich then grabbed his massive battle axe, a weapon that never left his side, and hefted it over one heavily muscled shoulder. Ulrich may have only been the village blacksmith, but he stood nearly a foot taller than any other man in Greytree, and he was well practiced in every weapon he had ever made. It was common knowledge to all. Anger Ulrich Mace at your peril. The first of the dragon boats hit the shore, its hull grinding to a halt on the sand. The moment it stopped, 24 reavers jumped from its hull. They were dressed in leather and steel armor, fashioned into horrific images of death and torture. The Skollreavers had a reputation for ferocity and unbridled bloodlust. When they charged into battle, they were relentless and cruel. The moment their feet hit the ground, they charged towards where the celebrations were being held, their screams of rage and anger the stuff of nightmares. No sooner had the first boat hit the shore, the other 5 boats followed, the raiding parties they carried quick to exit their craft and join the attack. Lord Asulf and his men met the first assault. It was a collision of steel and blood, both parties intending on ending the skirmish without mercy. Lord Asulf was one of the most experienced warriors in Greytree, and he led from the front, swinging his famed sword Doombringer in a frenzied arc of death and destruction. Astrid dragged her mother away from the center of town. An arrow lay embedded in her shoulder. A victim of the opening attack from the reavers, blood seeping heavily through her cloak, the sounds of steel on steel ringing loudly in their ears. "Why are they here?" Druid said, although she knew that the presence of the Skollreavers had very little to do with reason and order. "We have to keep moving," Astrid insisted, as she continued to drag her mother away from the carnage. A figure loomed out of the darkness and attempted to grab them, a massive Skollreaver warrior, armed with a large sword, his intentions clear on his toothless sneer. Druid fell to the ground, leaving Astrid alone to face the advances of the lone warrior. He laughed at what stood before him. Astrid pulled the sword at her side, the very same as the one she emerged with from the ruins of the second last trial. The Skollreaver eyed her blade, and wasted no time in his reply. Hefting his larger blade high, he brought it down, intending to cleave her in 2. Instead, she brought her own sword up, parried his attack, and without wasting any time, she swung the blade horizontally, the attacking warrior unprepared for the young girl's assault. The blade's edge slicing open his torso and emptying its contents. The Skollreaver was shocked, falling to his knees as he attempted to hold his stomach closed without success. She felt a hand grab her arm. Astrid swung around, preparing for yet another attack, her sword at the ready. Only instead of a Skollreaver, she came face to face with Magnus and Ivar, and with them their own families. "What are you doing out here?" Ivar asked, concerned. "It's not safe. We need to leave now," Magnus added. Astrid nodded. "We've been trying, but they're everywhere," Astrid replied, pointing to the dead Skollreaver laying at her feet. A war cry stirred them from their discussion. several armed reavers racing towards them. "Go! I'll deal with them!" Astrid yelled, her sword raised high. Magnus was about to argue, but the blacksmith's expression said otherwise. Instead, he grabbed Turid's arm. She attempted to stop him, but the arrow in her shoulder and subsequent blood loss had made her weak and not capable of argument, and along with his own family, they fled in the direction of home. Ivar, on the other hand, pushed his own family away. "Get out of here, mother," Ivar urged. In his own hand, he brandished his weapon, a family sword that, while it didn't look as impressive as Astrid's, it bore the jagged marks of previous combat. Ivar's father was no warrior. He nodded at his son and gripped his wife's arm and pulled her in the directions of the others. Everywhere he looked, there was steel ringing on steel, Skollreavers fueled with burning rage, attacking anything that moved, their ferocity more akin to a wild predator. But that didn't mean that the residents of Greytree were helpless. Far from it. From a young age, everyone in the village had been taught to wield a sword. Even those that were not in the Grey Watch took regular training. This was now being put to the test, as they faced off against a well-equipped raiding party of Skollreaver warriors. All this and much more went through his mind in less than a second, as Ulrich surveyed his options on the battlefield. Then he noticed his targets. 2 enemy warriors, terrorizing a mother and her 3 daughters, clearly enjoying their screams. Ulrich let out a fierce war cry and charged the pair, who were unprepared for a giant wielding an even bigger axe. The first warrior turned too slow, as Ulrich caught the man under the chin with the tip of his axe blade. He was dead before he hit the ground. The second fared only slightly better, parrying the axe at the last second, the force driving him back. The Reaver screamed his own battle cry, previous experience teaching him that the Reaver reputation was enough to turn a foe into a quivering lump of prey. However, after his verbal challenge, what he saw before him was a warrior nearly twice his size. Normally, Ulrich would use his size to intimidate an opponent, but today he didn't really have the time. Today, it was all about shock and awe. So, by the time the Skollreaver realized that he was in trouble, it was way too late. Ulrich swung his axe, both his size and that of his weapon sent the smaller warrior crashing to the ground forever. Ulrich barely had time to celebrate, as he was blindsided by another 3 Reavers, each one flashing their own weapons of destruction. Left behind by his father, Erik had no plans on sitting this battle out. Along with Pace, Rangvald, and Torben, the 4 armed youths, now turning their attentions towards a band of Reavers who were heading towards homes, families, and easier targets. They knew that the stakes they were facing were life and death, but the price of doing nothing or failure was an unacceptable. Erik led the teenagers in towards the center of the threat, gangs of Reavers eager to prey on the weak. They saw just that, as Erik and the others approached. A tall, bearded Reaver with skull tattoos covering his face howled like a wild animal and charged the 4 teenagers, in each hand a sizable tomahawk that bore runes and crude symbols etched into the blades. Erik unsheathed his sword and snarled his own challenge. "Bring it on, ugly!" Erik growled. This taunt seemed to unbalance the rampaging Reaver, who swung his tomahawks in dual arcs of destruction. But much to the barbarian's surprise, the teenager was no stranger to combat, easily parrying the brutal but clumsy swings, sparks flying from the metal-on-metal clashes. The Reaver roared and dived at Erik, who easily sidestepped the larger foe, and as he did so, he brought his own sword down, removing the right hand of his foe. It flopped to the ground, still gripping the tomahawk tight. The Reaver fell to his knees and gripped his now bloody stump with his remaining hand. He glared up at Erik, who looked amused at the turnaround. "Weren't expecting that. Were you?" Erik sneered, before thrusting his sword into the Reaver's heart, killing him instantly. Pace and the other boys were as shocked as the other Reavers, in which the teenage boy from Greytree had felled a seasoned Skollreaver warrior, single-handedly, and by all appearances without much effort. The stunned silence only lasted a moment, before their bloodthirsty nature took over and the other Reavers pressed their attack on the other boys. Astrid and Eivor were now alone, facing a small group of approaching Reavers. They were all wearing leather and steel armor, and carrying large, brutish weapons. They smiled cruelly at the young girl and chubby boy that stood before them, both armed, but clearly terrified. "Stay back, or else," Eivor stuttered a warning. The Reavers laughed back loudly. "Or else what, little one?" a stocky Reaver replied. He was missing an eye that was framed with heavy scar tissue. He could all but see the knocking in the chubby boy's knees. "This will be too easy," he thought, as he stepped forward, his chipped and dented sword in one hand. Eivor attempted to push Astrid behind him, but she was going to have none of it. "I'm staying," Astrid insisted. Eivor nodded. He was too scared and too focused to argue. The other Reavers were also closing in, sensing blood and wanting to be a part of it. Astrid knew that Eivor's and her own swordsmanship skills would not be good enough to stop them, but a thought lay in the back of her head, like a bright beacon, in a dark and foggy area. "Go, I'll hold them off," Eivor said grimly. He knew that the odds were against them. Astrid touched his arm. She was glad her friend was with her. She also knew that if what she was planning next didn't work, they were finished. "When I'm finished with you, boy, your own mother won't recognize you," the Reaver sneered. "I would say the same, but I doubt you even know who your mother is," Astrid replied. The other Reavers laughed, except for the one that the insult was directed against, his smile slipping from his face. Even Eivor was looking at her, and thinking that the certainty of death had made her crazy, especially when she pushed past him. "Please let me be right," Astrid whispered as she faced the 5 Reavers and raised her hands, and with all her concentration, she willed the power within her to come out. The air around her shimmered and distorted. Then a ball of pure flame the size of a shield formed in her hands. The Reavers stopped and regarded the image, not sure of what to make of it. A primal fear starting to grip them. A fear of magic, and things that were beyond their understanding. One of the Reavers attempted to grab the one out in front, his fingers gripping the tattered wolfskin wrapped around the shoulders of his brother in arms. However, the gesture was too late, as the ball of swirling flames in the hands of the young girl came rushing towards them at blinding speed, then enveloped them all in an extreme heat so powerful that it turned the Reavers to ash on contact. All Eivor could do was watch on in relief and wonder at what had just occurred in front of his very eyes. "What? What just happened?" Eivor stammered. "Now is not the time. But I promise, if we live through this night, I'll tell you everything," Astrid replied with an awkward smile. Eivor took this in, then nodded. "Let's go help the others," he said. That seals today's tale in shadows. We hope Raven's prophecy, The Elder Trials, has drawn you deeper into its enigma. Return soon to Crow's Quill's books, where the next chapter awaits, whispering secrets yet untold.